They say you don't truly know someone until money is on the line, but you don't truly know your children until they think you're dead. My name is Samuel Harrison. I spent 40 years building a real estate empire from nothing, all while telling my 3 children that we were just getting by. I wanted them to value hard work, to understand the weight of a dollar, and to love me for being their father, not their ATM. But after my wife, Eleanor, passed away, I saw a flicker of greed in their eyes that chilled me to the bone. So, I decided to conduct a final exam, a test of the heart. I faked my own passing to see what they would do with my worthless belongings. What they didn't know was that the greatest fortune I owned wasn't in a bank vault. It was hidden in the very items they threw into the dumpster the moment they thought I was gone. As I sat in a small, hidden apartment across the street, watching through a telescope, I saw my eldest son, Marcus, laughing as he tossed my late wife's hand-carved jewelry box into a trash bag. I saw my daughter, Chloe, complaining about the stale smell of my library while she shredded my personal journals. They were looking for gold bars and deed titles, tearing up the floorboards of my house, completely oblivious to the fact that the key to a $50 million trust fund was taped to the bottom of the old, rusted toolbox they had just sold to a neighbor for $5. By the time they realized their mistake, it would be too late. The inheritance wasn't going to the bloodline. It was going to the only person who saw value in a dead man's memories. Stick around, because the moment I walked back through those front doors is a moment they, and you, will never forget. I remember the freezing winters of my youth in the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. My father was a coal miner whose hands were permanently stained with the dust of the earth. He used to tell me, "Samuel, a man's worth isn't in what he owns, but in what he leaves behind that can't be sold." When I moved to the city and started Harrison Holdings, those words were my compass. I married Eleanor, a woman who grew up with even less than I did. Together, we built an empire. But we made a pact. Our children, Marcus, Chloe, and Julian, would be raised with the spirit of the mountains, not the vanity of the penthouse. We lived in a modest suburb, far from the glittering skyscrapers I owned. My children went to public schools, and their friends were the sons and daughters of mechanics and teachers. I drove a battered Ford truck and wore suits that were 5 years out of style. I told them that the company was always on the edge of bankruptcy, that we had to pinch pennies to make ends meet. It was a lie, yes, but it was a lie born out of love. I wanted them to be self-made. I wanted them to feel the pride of earning their first $1,000 without a safety net. But as the years went by, I realized that instead of teaching them resilience, I had unknowingly planted seeds of resentment. The true colors of my children began to bleed through during the holidays. I remember a Christmas when Marcus, then 24, threw a tantrum because I gave him a high-quality set of tools instead of the sports car he had seen me looking at in a magazine. He didn't know I owned the dealership. Then there was Chloe, who refused to bring her university friends home because she was ashamed of our modest living room. She didn't know the rug she was standing on was a vintage Persian silk worth more than her tuition. When Eleanor passed away from a sudden illness, the grief was a heavy fog over my life. But for my children, it was a business meeting. Even before the funeral service was over, Marcus was whispering to Chloe about Mom's hidden accounts. They didn't see a woman who had spent decades volunteering at soup kitchens. They saw a locked vault they hadn't found the key to yet. Julian, my youngest, was the only one who sat by her grave for hours, talking to the cold stone as if she could still hear him. It was then that I knew I had to do something. I was getting older, and I couldn't leave my legacy to people who only valued the price tag. I contacted my lawyer, Elias, a man who had been my shadow for 40 years. "I'm going fishing, Elias," I told him over a glass of scotch. "And I'm not coming back for a week. Tell them the boat was found empty near the gorge. Tell them the current was too strong." Elias looked at me with a mix of concern and admiration. "Samuel, you're playing with fire. They might burn the house down searching for the loot." I smiled sadly. That's exactly what I need to see. The announcement of my disappearance was handled with cold efficiency. I moved into a small rental unit directly across from my estate. I had installed high-definition cameras in every room of my house months ago, disguised as smoke detectors and vents. As the news broke, I sat in my darkened room, heart hammering against my ribs. I wanted to be wrong. I prayed that Marcus would break down in tears. I hoped Chloe would hug my old sweaters and weep for the father she lost. But as the first car pulled into the driveway, I realized my prayers were in vain. The mourning period lasted exactly 12 minutes. That was how long it took for Marcus to pull a crowbar out of his trunk. He has to have a safe room, Marcus shouted, his voice echoing through the cameras. All those years of saving, he was hoarding it. I know it. Chloe wasn't far behind. She started opening my late wife's closets, not to smell her perfume, but to check the linings of her coats for sewn-in diamonds. They began a systematic destruction of my home. They tore down the wallpaper in the study, thinking there were hidden compartments. They smashed the antique grandfather clock that Eleanor's father had given us. A clock that held no money, only history. Watching them was like watching strangers rob a grave. Julian was the only one who tried to stop them. "What are you guys doing?" he yelled, his voice cracking. "Dad is gone. Have some respect." Marcus just shoved him aside. "Shut up, Julian. You were always a loser. While you're crying over a fishing hat, we're securing our future." By the third day, the house looked like a war zone. Chloe had called a junk removal service. She started throwing away boxes of my old journals. Journals where I had written down every dream I had for them, every struggle I faced to keep the business afloat during the 2008 crash. "Who cares about his old rants?" she said, tossing 40 years of my life into a black trash bag. Then came the garage. My father's old metal toolbox sat on the workbench. It was heavy, grease-stained, and rusted. It was the only thing I had brought with me from the coal mines. Marcus looked at it with pure disgust. "This stinks of oil," he complained. He lugged it to the end of the driveway and put a sign on it, "Free trash." He didn't bother to look inside. If he had, he would have found the false bottom. Underneath the rusted wrenches was a waterproof envelope containing the deed to a 50-story office tower in Manhattan, a building that generated $3 million a month in rent. He traded a literal mountain of gold for a clean workbench. While Marcus and Chloe were destroying the house, I watched a man named Mr. Henderson walk by. He was a neighbor, a retired school janitor who had been struggling to pay his medical bills. I saw him stop at the curb, look at the toolbox, and then look around. He picked it up with a gentle hand, almost as if he knew it had a story. He took it home. Later that night, I saw him on his porch through my telescope. He wasn't looking for money. He was cleaning the tools one by one with a rag. He was respecting the craftsmanship of a man he barely knew, while my own flesh and blood were treating my life like a garage sale. Meanwhile, Julian was sitting in the middle of the ransacked living room, holding the only thing he had saved, the old tattered fishing hat I wore on the day I supposedly died. He was crying, truly crying. He wasn't looking for a safe or a bank account. He was mourning a father who he thought died believing his children loved him. My heart broke for Julian, but it hardened like granite for the other two. The test was reaching its climax. Elias called them to his office on the 5th day. I was hidden behind a one-way mirror in the conference room. Marcus arrived wearing a new suit he had clearly bought on credit, expecting a windfall. Chloe was already talking about a facelift and a trip to Paris. Julian looked like a shadow of a man. Elias stood up, his face as cold as a mountain peak. "Your father's estate is complex," he began. He left a very specific clause. He stated that his true inheritance was hidden in plain sight. He said that those who cherished his history would find his wealth. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. "Don't give us that riddle crap, Elias. We tore that house apart. There's nothing there. Just old books and rusted tools." Elias smiled a thin, dangerous smile. "Exactly, Marcus. You found the house was empty because you were looking for cash, not for your father." The realization hit Chloe first. Her face went pale. "The boxes. The ones we sent to the landfill." She started shaking. Marcus realized it too. They scrambled out of the office, pushing past people in the lobby, racing back to the house. I watched through the cameras as they reached the curb just as the city sanitation truck was pulling away. Marcus tried to chase the truck, screaming like a madman, waving his arms. He actually tried to jump onto the back of the garbage truck to find the treasure he had thrown away. They spent the next 6 hours at the city dump, knee-deep in filth, tearing through bags of literal garbage. They were covered in slime and shame, looking for the journals and the boxes they had so arrogantly discarded. It was a poetic sight. 2 millionaires in waiting, digging through the city's waste because they realized they had thrown away $50 million. They found nothing. The golden key was gone, or so they thought. The next morning, I decided it was time to come back from the dead. I drove my old Ford truck into the driveway. Marcus and Chloe were sitting on the curb, covered in dirt and smelling of the landfill, looking defeated. When they saw the truck, they froze. Chloe screamed, thinking she was seeing a ghost. I stepped out, leaning on my cane, and looked at the house they had destroyed. "You guys really made a mess of the place," I said calmly. The next hour was a symphony of lies. "Dad, we were so worried. We were cleaning up to make a memorial for you," Marcus stammered. I looked him in the eye. "I have cameras, Marcus. I saw the crowbar. I saw the dumpster. And I saw you throw away your mother's journals." The silence that followed was heavy. I told them to come inside. I had called Mr. Henderson, the neighbor, to join us. In front of my 3 children, I asked Mr. Henderson to open the toolbox. He did, and I showed them the false bottom. I pulled out the deed to the Manhattan Tower. Marcus's eyes filled with a terrifying mix of greed and regret. That's ours," he whispered. I shook my head. "No, Marcus. You said this was trash. You gave it away. And in the eyes of the law, a gift given cannot be reclaimed." I turned to Mr. Henderson. "Arthur, you treated these tools with respect. You saw the value in a man's work. As of today, you are the legal owner of this deed. It will pay for your medical bills and a lot more." I didn't leave Marcus and Chloe with nothing. I gave them a small, modest apartment in a rough part of town and a job at one of my entry-level warehouses. "If you want the life you dreamed of," I told them, "you'll have to earn it at $12 an hour." Julian, however, was given the keys to the company. He didn't want it, which is exactly why he was the only one I could trust to run it. He used the profits to build schools and hospitals, keeping Eleanor's name alive. I'm an old man now, and I know my time is truly coming soon. But I sleep well at night. I learned that you can't inherit character, and you can't buy a legacy. My children learned that the things we think are worthless are often the only things that truly matter. To everyone watching, look at the old things in your life. The stories, the memories, the dusty tools. Don't throw them away. Because one day, you might find that the trash you discarded was the only treasure you ever really had. Thanks for listening. If you've ever had to deal with greedy family, tell me your story in the comments. Let's remember what's truly valuable together. Good night.